Good evening. I'm Nobel, President of the Foreign Policy Association, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this second collaboration between the Foreign Policy Association and the Committee of 100. The mission of the Foreign Policy Association has been for the last 107 years is to serve as a catalyst for developing awareness, understanding, and informed opinion on U.S. foreign policy and global issues. With its balanced, nonpartisan programs and publications, FPA encourages citizens to participate in the foreign policy process. I have known Peter Young, Committee of 100 board member, for many years, and we came up with the idea of a series of joint meetings between the FPA and the Committee of 100. Given our overlapping missions, it seemed like a natural thing to do. I'm so glad to see that there's a good mix of FPA and Committee of 100 participants this evening. As you know, our first collaboration was last March when we co-sponsored an in-person panel at the Harvard Club, topic of diplomacy to culture, that featured leading experts from the arts. Peter did a brilliant job of moderating it, and we figured with that under our belt, we should try another one. Today's collaboration with leading economists addresses the question, is deglobalization inevitable? A timely topic at any point in history, but of particular importance today, given the major dislocations in trade. Are we just going through a phase, or are we heading for a long-term breakdown in global trade? We hope that you will come away from this event more knowledgeable about the topic and with a better sense of where the world is heading. Let me now turn the microphone over to Peter Young, who will brief you on this evening's unique format. Peter.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure to have so many familiar faces here. We have a lot of people online. We have a good group here, a few people who are struggling to get through the traffic of the UN General Assembly. We can tell which people gave up on cabs and took the subway because they're still mopping themselves with napkins. But we're very pleased to have you here. This is a very interesting topic because it's been an interesting topic over a long period of time, but as Noel said, it's particularly interesting now because of the confluence of a lot of different things. So I wanted to say that it's a very special event because we have, first of all, Professor Joe Stiglitz, who everyone knows, and who is an extraordinary economist, leader, and a thought leader. And this happens to be a topic that he cares a lot about, and it's written and spoken a lot. But on top of that, we're going to have a debate between two professors who are going to take opposite sides of this topic. Good news is because they're virtual, they can punch each other, be physical with each other, and in fact, they are not only separate virtually, but they're actually both online. The interesting thing is that Paul Nobel, normally Professor Nobel, British Professor of Business, they both happen to be in China now. So they have been tanked up with coffee because it's 5:45 a.m. in China. So we want to thank them for it. They're online now. We have soon. But we want to thank them for getting us so early. I want to talk a little bit about 100, which is not quite as old as but it's started 37 years ago with two dual missions. One is to defend the rights of Chinese Americans in this country, which is a bigger problem today than it was 37 years ago, but also to help better relations between the U.S. and China, and that's an equally tough tough problem. We have two of the founders here, Oscar Tang and Andrew Tang, are here in the audience here. And I want to thank them for having started 2,100 years ago and accomplishing so many great things. I want to talk about the logistics. So first of all, before we start, we're going to do something interesting, which is we're going to do a poll of both people here in person and the people who are online. And the way it is we let the QR code, if you just scan it, it's using Microsoft Office forms. And we just want you to point your camera at the QR code. Those of you who are online, please just do the same thing. And then just answer which side of the question. Here we go. Now this is live, so thus far, for this question, 66% of you have said they disagree that deglobalization is inevitable, and 34% they agree. So remember those numbers, because now we're going to compare them at the end. So, next, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Joe Stiglitz to the stage. Joe, if you could come up, and if Joe wanted to talk about physical education, they would make room for him in the class. But he's pretty extraordinary. He was a co-founder and president of the Initiative for Policy Dialogue at Columbia and chief economist of the Roosevelt Institute. Now, he's also gotten a lot of awards, but the two that I find most interesting, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics for his analyses of markets with asymmetric information, and he was a lead author for the 1995 report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but he also, for which he shared the Nobel Peace Prize, and he's been named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world, and there I happen to agree with Time magazine. So thank you very much, Joe, for being, and he's written about this topic, very frequently. So let's just do a fireside chat, and so. Joe, the topic of globalization has been near and dear to you over many years, and you have both written and spoken about the topic regularly. Maybe if you could give the audience sort of a big picture view of the overall issue and some historical perspective.
Well, there's always been an ebb and flow in the extent to which countries are integrated with each other. And we've seen integrated, we can talk about trade flows, financial flows, investment flows, and knowledge flows. I mean, those are existing examples, cultural flows. There are many ways in which different countries interact with each other. And we've talked about globalization. I think we talk about economic globalization. And the period after World War II, and particularly beginning in the middle of the 1975, was a period of increasing global integration. And we created institutions like 1995, the WTO. After World War II, we created the IMF, the multilateral development banks. So we created, in many, in the case of trade, we aspired to a world without borders, where trade of goods and services could flow freely. in 1944, when the IMF was founded, it was assumed that capital would not flow as freely. World of capital controls. And in fact, when I was at the World Bank, there was major controversy because the IMF in 1997 decided that it wanted to expand its mandate to instruct countries to eliminate barriers to the flow of financial capital. It's been a disaster. It didn't happen. But the fact that it said pushed many countries to eliminate their capital controls resulted in the East Asian crisis. At least that's my interpretation. Capital flowed in, and then suddenly it flowed out. It was a major crisis. And then there have been efforts to increase the flows of investment with, we call it investment agreements that protect, were said to protect property rights, but they were really not protecting property against expropriation, but really against regulation. And so foreign firms could get more protection in a country than domestic firms. And that became a real bane of contention in many countries. And then, interestingly, the one area where the international community worked to slow down integration was in knowledge. And they created intellectual property rights. They call it rights, but it was like a human right, but the intent of which was make it more difficult for knowledge to go across borders. And so in three of the areas there was a real struggle to open up, and this one area struggled to close it down. Well, when I wrote my book, Globalization and Discontent, it was after maybe 2 decades of what is called neoliberal globalization, where there was integration of the countries of the world. And in many ways, things were not going very well, particularly for many developing countries. But a few developing countries were doing very well. And most main example was China. After the Cultural Revolution, reform opening up, China, it was really the right timing, because the world was opening up at the same time that China was opening up. And China's GDP per capita increased 8-10-fold in a relatively short period of time. And just to give you, it was the fastest rate of growth that has ever been experienced in the world. And it was really enabled by globalization. It could not have happened, I think, without globalization. But the success of China and a few other countries wasn't matched everywhere in the world. Africa actually experienced over the same quarter century, deindustrialization as a result of the strictures that were imposed by the IMF. So these were very poor countries. They went to the IMF and the World Bank for money. The IMF and World Bank said, if you want our money, which they needed to survive, here are what you have to do. And among the things that they did, at the very time that China was industrializing, they said to China, to Africa, you have to open up your markets, and the effect of what they did without any support was deindustrializing.
And not just Africa, right? Other countries.
Oh,
as
yeah,
well.
Latin America
Yeah,
also.
right.
So it was this very contrasting.
Yeah, right.
And the second thing that was going on at the same time was deindustrialization in America.
Right.
And way we did deindustrialization, probably changes in technology had a greater role in the loss of jobs in manufacturing US than trade. But blaming trade was easy. You didn't want to say, oh, I can't keep up with the world. Nobody says that. They said unfair trade.
Right.
So that became the focus of the criticism. The real, from my perspective, the real flaw was, with respect to the United States, was our own domestic policy. That when I was in the Clinton administration, I argued that you needed assistance for people who were losing their job, whether it was from trade or technology. And to be quite frank, the Republicans said no. And the result was, they said markets will take care of it. And markets didn't take care of it. And you saw a decline in standards of living, kind of alienation in large parts of the country. So when I wrote the book, I had just come out of being chief economist of the World Bank, and I have to admit, most of my focus at that time was on how the global economic architecture was unfair to developing countries. And just, to hear the President of the United States say that the trade agreements are unfair to the United States. When we wrote those trade agreements, I find a little bit precious. I mean, I don't know what the word to say, but I just find it straight wrong.
Yeah.
But the side of it is there have been Americans who have suffered from globalization, and we didn't do to help them adjust, right? But that was our fault. We wrote these trade agreements, and then we didn't accompany the trade agreements and the other, agreements with the policies that would have made everybody winner.
Plus, there's a lot of misinformation about what's causing what, right? And that's a part of the picture today, which is people misunderstanding what actually causes job loss or
Exactly. And that's why I said the job loss was almost surely much more to do with technology. Just to give you one example, I come from Gary, Indiana, steel town. I went back there to make a movie about a decade ago, and when did steel was it? And they told me they were producing as much steel as they were at the peak, but they didn't have any workers. And as a result, Gary was a ghost town. It had lost over half its population. Really dramatic seeing what happened, but
it's due to automation.
Due to automation, and this, by the way, we're getting ahead of the story, but when President Trump says that all these tariffs are going to bring jobs back to America, I don't think he's going to succeed in bringing manufacturing back to America for reasons we could talk about later. But even if he brings back manufacturing, it'll be jobless manufacturing. I was in China in March, went to a car, electric car factory, and a car, amazing car, much better than Tesla. So none of you need to buy a Tesla, and in every way superior. But they were producing 1,000 cars a day with 2,000 workers. And most of the workers were doing nothing but watching to make sure that the robots behaved. And they told me that, you know, this was just a new factory, and once the shakedown period was over and the robots were well behaved, most of those workers were going to be fired or, you know, reassigned. The other thing that was really interesting that they told me, in this company, in the auto, you know, in the company, half the workers are engineers. Yeah. We haven't been training those engineers. So they're not going to be, you know, if we brought back a competitive, if we were able to have a competitive auto factory, it won't be for the jobs that are the high school graduates, or let alone high school dropouts. It's going to be for people who have engineering degrees.
Yeah. And of course, AI is going to be have the same effect as robots and things and automation, right?
Yeah.
On jobs.
Yeah.
And that clearly not because of trade, right?
Exactly.
Well, you know, obviously, it's very interesting. If you look at, you know, read the newspapers and Financial Times and so forth, you get a sense for what's hot and what's not by what the headlines. And clearly, globalization and tariffs are a hot topic. It's every day it's in it. So it's a particularly hot topic, not only in the U.S., but many countries around the world. The multilateral institutions and negotiations have become weaker. And there's been a major increase by actions against other countries and tariffs, such as the U.S., restrictions on ownership, technology, national security invoked actions, blocking the sale of certain products, et cetera. So please share with us, how would you view the current situation? How would you summarize, you know, a big picture summary of the current situation? Because it certainly has changed, you know, over the last 5 to 10 years, right?
So let me try to divide it into three parts. You know, first, after the financial crisis of 2008, that was a turning point where we came to understand that financial market integration, if you don't have good regulation, can be very destabilizing. The fact that the U.S. did not regulate its financial markets well resulted in a global meltdown. So not only can good things go across borders, but bad things can go across borders. So the problem of contagion became a big concern. And if you look at some of the data in the period after 2008, it marked a decline in investment flows, even trade flows. And some people would describe it went off what it was called hyperglobalization. Mm-hmm. So some people thought the period before 2008 was that we had pushed globalization too far in an unthoughtful way, and so that was the phase, you might say, the ending of hyperglobalization. Yeah. And then comes Trump's first term, and Biden and the pandemic, and Trump's second term. That period, relatively short period of time, had a number of fundamental challenges, I'll use that word, to globalization. One of them was the pandemic showed the lack of resilience in supply chain. It showed that the U.S. could not even produce simple things like protective gear. countries around the world violated the strictures of the WTO and ordered their vaccine. The people were dying, and some countries in Europe said, even if South Africa and India have the capacity to produce vaccines, we won't allow them to do it. And so some of us were involved in a movement to get President Biden to support a waiver of intellectual property to
Accelerate.
accelerate, and he did.
Yeah.
But we could not get Germany, Switzerland, and UK to go along. And we couldn't get Biden even to support a waiver on the therapeutics. So you could imagine the view in the third world about, it was called vaccine apartheid, what globalization was doing. And so, that was a moment, if you couldn't get global cooperation on this topic, both for moral reasons, for humanitarian, but also for our own self-interest. Because if you don't control a pandemic, the disease mutates, and there's a risk of ricocheting back. Didn't happen, but any rational person would say there's a risk, and we want the disease squashed. So that was, you might say, a low point, but it had implications, I think, for global relations. Then comes along from second term, and he had rewritten the U.S., the NAFTA, the agreement between Mexico, Canada, and the United States, and almost on day one, he tore it up. And so, and made it very clear, he doesn't care about international economic law. So, if you're trying to have a rules-based international order, that's not a good thing. Any agreement isn't worth the paper it's written on. And then a principle of international trade, that since the end of World War II, is called the most favored nation. Where you treat everybody as well as you treat. And we just had the head of the WTO talk about come to Colombia, and it's was one of those half full, half empty. The percentage of trade that's covered now by MFN went down from 80% to something like 70%. Is that a small decline or a big decline? It was, we haven't seen declines like that overnight, but we still have a system that's working for other countries, trading with each other. Most of the trade is, there's a lot of trade in different countries. They respect international law, but we aren't. The United States.
And if you look at a lot of the data, some rather curious things are happening. Like Brazil's exports actually have increased because exports can flow to lots of places, right?
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, that was the case. He was complaining about trade deficits, but but we have a trade surplus, Brazil. And it was one of the few instances. It was where we were using explicitly, and he was very explicit. The reason he imposed a 50% tariff against Brazil was because they wanted to try, and they did try, their former president Bolsonaro from doing what Trump had done on January 6th, they did on January 8th, but the January 8th was much more vicious, but they were much more prepared because they had seen January 6th. And they anticipated it. Lula became the president, the Supreme Court tried Bolsonaro and he was convicted. And President Lula wrote a very powerful op-ed last Monday in the New York Times where basically he said, our sovereignty is not up for sale. Our sovereignty is not going to be traded away. And so that was I think, another, what did you say, defining moment. One more, so the US, Trump was imposing tariffs on one country after another for political reasons. It was not economic, that was political. A lot of antipathy towards China. And he basically had the feeling, the position was the cards were in the US hand. I wrote an op-ed saying that's not true. The cards were actually in China's hands, and if the rest of the world globally got together, I think that would be true more generally. And the reason for that, why in the case of China, where it's so clear the cards were in China's hand, is it's not just the flow of, the magnitude of the flows of goods and services that's an issue. It's how substitutable are your markets, are your sources of your inputs.
Right.
So if, say, in the case of Brazil, it might be selling some of its commodity, oil, to the United States. Or, that may be a bad example, or soybean.
Or sugar, right?
Sugar.
Yeah, sugar.
But if it doesn't sell the sugar to the United States, it'll sell it in the global market.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it doesn't care very much. China buys, grains,
soybeans
from the United States. If it says we're not going to buy it in the United States, it's not shooting terrorists. We always say shoot yourself in the foot. You're paying. Your consumers pay the price of the tariff. But if you say we're not going to buy American soybeans, that's no big deal. You buy soybeans from any other country. So you're not imposing cost on your consumers. But meanwhile, China was selling rare earths and magnets to the United States. And people have been warning the United States, you are excessively dependent on China. And China, over the years, has gotten a dominant position in many of these rare earths and minerals and in the magnets. And if they said we won't sell it to you, it means U.S. can't produce cars and lots of other things. So it was so clear that the cards were in China's hand. And when China said, we are not going to be bullied, we'll retaliate. And part of the retaliation is we won't sell you these things. That's when the expression taco got invented. Trump always chickens out, and he chickened out and lowered the tariffs. He said we're going to continue negotiating. This will go on and off. One thing. The one thing, just one more aspect of the new regime, globalization regime that we're in, is that when you have these discretionary tariffs, either putting them on, taking them off, discretionary actions, that kind, without due process, opens up enormous corruption. And so what you see is that, you're never sure. You're never sure. Some company gets an exception, some country gets an exception.
Why? Right. Yeah, why? And of course, the other part what you're talking about is how you impose it and the uncertainty. The fact that it keeps going up and down. one company said, I'd love to restart this plant, but it would take me 2 years. And I said, and I don't know whether the tariff's going to change again and the whole basis for the
We
investment.
don't know that they're going to change.
Well, but uncertainty, the uncertainty has also been injected, right?
It really is.
Right.
So, and it's actually that uncertainty is itself an impediment for investment into the United States. It's a minor footnote. One of the main reasons the U.S. economy is not in much worse shape than it is. That we haven't been creating any jobs, so that's not a good sign. But it would be in much worse shape is that we're going through right now through, I think, an irrational exuberance in AI.
Yeah.
And there's so much construction of
Data centers
and energy
chips and so
supply.
forth, right?
Yeah. So we're going through, 25 years later, a much more virulent form of the tech boom that we had at the end of the 90s. And I think when we come off of that, it may be more dramatic.
But the only certain thing is your electric bill is going to go up, right? That's the only thing. If any prediction around data centers, that's the only prediction. If we step back, it's interesting. You mentioned that after World War II and so forth, that you use the word hyper, globalization. So if you think about the current situation, drivers, and then you look in the future, do you think it's a case where we're going to hyper globalization and then it's going to come down, it's going to be more traditional globalization? Or do you think that you're going to have some serious deglobalization relative to the long-term trends? What's your crystal ball feel?
Yeah. So there are two aspects, three. Well, let me say. First, there is a change going on in the structure of the economy. So we are moving from manufacturing to services.
Yes.
And some services are tradable, but many services are not. And so I think, not sure, but I think that change in the structure of our economy by itself would lead to a reduced role of globalization.
Yeah.
So that has nothing to do with tariffs or confidence, borderless.
We're a long-term and
Right. It's a long-term trend of the structure of our economy. The second thing is that once you go into, we trusted, companies trusted that there was a certain global stability that they could make an investment or export, get a supply chain from, there was a certain confidence that there was an international rule of law.
Right.
And that gave a kind of certainty. It wasn't perfect, but, and I criticized it in many ways, but it gave a certainty to operation. Once you destroy it, it's going to take a while to bring back confidence.
Right.
Because if the United States could elect Trump once, I said, it might happen again.
That's right.
It did. If you could elect it twice, it might happen, not Trump, but it could be another person. And, he's not doing these things alone. There are a large, 70% of the Republican Party in polls say they believe that Trump won the 2020 election, even though he lost it by 7 million votes and there have been 64 cases. But 70% of the Republican, one of the two major parties, believe that that's not true. So if that's the system that we live in, how can any firm have confidence that even after we have a normal Republican, until we went back to the Republican Party of the past.
And I think you make a really good point, because a lot of people, when they think about globalization, they just get fixated on economics. But the reality is, a lot of the factors like politics, public sentiment, military, geopolitical things you mentioned, and those are significant factors as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's part of the ether that we're living in, and so I find it unlikely that we or other countries are going to go back to where it was for 2016. The third thing, though, is a sense I have of, went to a big international meeting called Finance for Development in Seville. It's a meeting that they have every 5-10 years. The last one was in 2015. Now it's about thinking about how do you have finance for developing countries. And there was an enormous enthusiasm at that conference for globalization of a form, because the United States was not there.
Yeah.
It was a sense of, now we can start interacting on terms with each other, a level playing field.
Yeah.
So there was a sense of, and everybody's asking the question, what kind of globalization can we create if the United States is not fully there? Can't really withdraw. We live on one planet, so you start. But it is a change, and so I think that is going to be. We're very American centric, naturally living here, but remember that we're only 20% of the global, less than 20% of the global economy.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's going to be a ricochet in the rest of the world of saying, okay, we really do need to have a rules-based system. We're small, many of them are small countries. We have to be open. And, that one of the reasons Sweden, some of the Scandinavian countries have been so successful is they said, we have to be open. We don't have any choice. But if we're going to be open, we have to make sure that everybody benefits from being open. So we have to have what they call it, the labor market policy, job training, good job. I think in the rest of the world, there will be more openness.
Yeah.
And they will be striving to have better systems of rules that are more robust than clearly the rules that we've had so far.
Joe, one other question is, it's issue we talked about economics and about this and that. Do you think that part of the problem is, one, lack of knowledge of economic principles on the part of certain leaders, but the other is bad information? And I think a good example is what you referred to before. You said U.S. actually, we have a trade surplus and a lot of it is services. And yet there's no one in the current administration that even mentions that, right?
Yeah.
But there's an example where is it because they don't have the information or because they don't have the knowledge of how to look at it? But if you don't, then you get misled as to what the situation is, right?
Yeah, I mean, if they don't have the information, it's a willful denial. It's out there. If you open up your eyes, you know that the services are, whether it's financial services, educational services, health services, we are a service sector economy.
Yeah.
And how could you not know it if you don't understand that? You've put blinders on. The point that we're, that we have this surplus in the service sector, we still have an overall trade deficit. Is very important in Trump's thinking. And I think he's really mindset is sort of growing up in the 1950s. When everybody was enamored of cars, big cars, and that was America, our cars. And we moved on, and he hasn't. The really important thing to realize is what he's doing to our service sector. If you thought, that if you're really worried about our trade, our balance of goods and services, look what he's done. He's been attacking our universities. He's made tourism really unattractive. If you come here and you can't get a visa, and if you do get a visa, you might be stopped at the border and shipped off to Louisiana. It's not a very...
You're lucky if it's Louisiana.
Absolutely. This is just I was talking to the finance minister of a major African country who said a major issue in their U.S. relationship is that the U.S. wants to ship Venezuelan deportees to his country, and they say, no. He's really angry at them. And it's, he hasn't said it's going to put tariffs, but it's a real source of diplomatic tension. I mean, to me, I just sort of another one of those examples of things where you can't believe this is really going on.
But it's right.
But it is.
But by the way, there's one other thing that scares me to death is leaders that are insulated from the actual information. Someone said there's only one thing worse than an autocrat, and that's an autocrat that's surrounded by yes people who won't tell him that actually the Russian army will not take over Ukraine in 3 days, right?
Right.
And if Putin had the proper information about the condition of his military and so forth, maybe he still would have done the same thing, but he was misled by his cadre, right? And there's a little bit of that going on, and around the world, where you have, increasing autocrats, but ones that are insulated from proper information.
Very, very much. But there's one other aspect I wanted to talk about. Trump has this focus on deficits, but the question, if you look at, economists say you only need to look at the multilateral deficit. You want to know, from a macroeconomic point of view, if you're concerned about jobs, it's the multilateral deficit. It doesn't matter whether you buy goods from one country or another, it's some. But then macroeconomics teaches you that the multilateral trade deficit is really related to macroeconomics. It's the flip side. If a country has a aggregate domestic savings that's less than aggregate domestic investment, that means that gap has to be filled by capital inflow, and the corresponding to capital inflow is a deficit with the services. You're not going to change that multilateral trade deficit unless you change the macroeconomics. And he is changing the macroeconomics, but in the opposite direction. So in the end, after all this turmoil that we're going through, the likelihood is that we will wind up with a larger multilateral trade deficit.
Well, it's going to be very, very, very interesting. Well, Joe, I want to thank you so much for these wonderful insights. I think there are some more categories of Nobel Awards that are coming your way, I suspect. But this has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope the audience has appreciated some of these insights. But it's really wonderful. And I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening for this fireside chat. Thank you.